Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Mr. Harris loved trains. He was afraid of airplanes and didn't like buses. But trains? They were big, noisy, and exciting. When he was a 10-year-old boy, he loved trains. Now, at 50, he still loved them. On the night of September 14th, Mr. Harris was traveling on the night train from Helsinki to Oulu, Finland. It was a long journey, 10 hours, but he didn't mind. I have my book and newspaper, he thought. There's a good restaurant on the train, and after this, I have 2 weeks of holiday with my Finnish friends in Oulu. This will be nice. The train wasn't very crowded, and no one came into his carriage. That made him happy. Most passengers slept through the night. But Mr. Harris liked to stay awake, looking out the window, reading, and thinking. After dinner in the restaurant, he returned to his seat by the window. For an hour or two, he watched the trees and lakes of Finland pass by. Then, as darkness covered the land, he opened his book and began to read. At midnight, the train stopped at a small station called Otava. Mr. Harris looked out the window, but the platform was empty. The train started moving again into the dark night. Suddenly, the door to his carriage opened. 2 people entered, a young man and a young woman. The woman was angry. She slammed the door shut and shouted, "Carl! You can't do this to me." The young man laughed loudly and sat down. Mr. Harris, a quiet and gentle man, did not like loud voices or noisy people. He always dressed in simple, calm-colored clothes and spoke softly. The sudden shouting annoyed him. He frowned slightly and sighed. This is not what I wanted on a peaceful train journey, he thought. Young people are always noisy, Mr. Harris thought with frustration. Why can't they talk quietly? He put his book down and closed his eyes, hoping to sleep. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't. The 2 young people kept talking. The young woman sighed and lowered her voice. "Carl, you're my brother, and I love you. But please, listen to me. You can't take my diamond necklace. Give it back to me now, please." Carl smiled, a smug look on his face. "No, Elena," he said. "I'm going back to Russia soon, and I'm taking your diamonds with me." He removed his hat and placed it on the seat beside him. "Elena, listen. You have a rich husband, but me? I have nothing, no money, no future. How am I supposed to live? You can't give me money, so I need your diamonds, little sister." Mr. Harris glanced at the young woman. She was small, with black hair and dark eyes. Her face was pale, and she looked afraid. His heart softened. He felt sorry for her, but something else troubled him. Why haven't they looked at me even once? He wondered. Do they not see me sitting here? Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. Mr. Harris had to listen carefully. "Carl, you came to dinner at our house tonight. After dinner, you went into my room and took my diamond necklace. How could you do that to me?" Her voice trembled. "My husband gave those diamonds to me. Before that, they belonged to his mother. He's going to be very, very angry. And I'm afraid of him." Carl laughed, unconcerned. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his hand, and slowly opened it. The necklace sparkled in the dim light, its diamonds catching every glimmer. Mr. Harris stared at it, mesmerized. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the train, rushing forward into the cold, dark night. Mr. Harris opened his book again, but he couldn't read a single word. His eyes stayed on Carl, on his cold smile, his sharp, hungry eyes. "Such beautiful, beautiful diamonds," Carl said, admiring the necklace. I can get a lot of money for these. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Give them back to me, Karl. My husband, he's going to kill me. You're my brother, please help me, please. Karl only laughed. Mr. Harris clenched his fists. He had never wanted to hit someone so badly in his life. Go home, little sister, Karl said cruelly. I'm not giving the diamonds back. Go home to your angry husband. Suddenly, something flashed in Elena's hand, a long, bright knife. Mr. Harris's eyes widened in shock. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. Give me back the diamonds. Elena cried, her voice shaking with desperation. Or I'm going to kill you. Her hand trembled, but the blade gleamed under the dim train lights. Karl only laughed harder. What a sister, he sneered. What a kind, sweet sister. Then, in an instant, the knife moved fast and deadly, up, then down. A terrible, piercing scream filled the carriage. Karl's body collapsed onto the seat, blood spread across the fabric, dark and red. The diamond necklace slipped from his lifeless fingers and fell to the floor with a soft clink. Elena stared, frozen in horror. Her face turned ghostly white. No, she whispered. Karl, come back. Come back. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to dash, but Karl didn't answer. His blood slowly pooled on the floor beneath him. Elena covered her face with her hands. A second scream, long, broken, filled with grief, echoed through the carriage. Mr. Harris stood motionless, his own face pale as a sheet. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Slowly, shakily, he stepped back, moving toward the door. Elena sat still, unmoving. She didn't look up. She didn't say a word, and as Mr. Harris stepped out into the corridor, the train rushed forward, carrying them all deeper into the dark, endless night. Mr. Harris ran as fast as he could. He had to find the guard. The guard was at the back of the train, and within half a minute, Mr. Harris reached him. Come quickly. Mr. Harris gasped. An accident. A young woman, her brother, he's dead. The guard's eyes widened. Without hesitation, he followed Mr. Harris back to the carriage. Mr. Harris threw open the door and stepped inside. But, there was nothing, no body, no young woman, no blood, no knife, no diamond necklace, only his own bags, his hat, and his coat. Mr. Harris stood frozen. His breath came in short gasps. He turned to the guard, who was staring at him with a puzzled expression. But they were here, Mr. Harris stammered. I saw them. The young woman, she had a knife, she killed her brother. The guard frowned. A knife, you say? Yes. Mr. Harris said quickly. A long knife. And her brother. He took her diamonds. So she, diamonds, the guard interrupted, his voice calm. He looked at Mr. Harris thoughtfully. Was the young woman's name Elena? Mr. Harris blinked in shock. Yes. Yes, it was. How do you know that? Do you? Do you know her? The guard let out a slow breath. Yes. And no, he said. For a moment, he was silent, lost in thought. Then, he turned back to Mr. Harris and said in a low voice, Elena di Serenelli. Mr. Harris shivered at the name. She had dark eyes and black hair, very beautiful, the guard continued. She was half Italian, half Finnish. Her brother was only her half-brother. They had the same father, but his mother was Russian, I think, was. Mr. Harris whispered, his heart pounding. The guard nodded grimly. Elena di Serenelli died about 80 years ago. Mr. Harris felt cold all over. What? What are you saying? He asked, his voice barely audible. But I saw them. I saw her. I saw her kill him, the guard sighed. Yes, that's right, he said. You saw them. But they're not alive. They're ghosts. Mr. Harris felt the floor sway beneath him. They often appear on the night train around this time in September, the guard continued. I've never seen them myself, but last year, another man and his wife did. They were very upset. But what can I do? I can't stop Elena and Carl from coming on the train. He looked at Mr. Harris's pale, trembling face and patted his shoulder. You need a drink, he said. Come, have some vodka with me. Mr. Harris rarely drank vodka. But at that moment, he was too shaken to refuse. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena's knife, heard Carl's terrible scream, so he followed the guard to the back of the train. The vodka warmed him, and slowly, his hands stopped shaking. He didn't want to go back to his carriage. So he stayed with the guard, listening as he spoke. It's a famous story, the guard said. I don't remember all the details, it happened so long ago. But Elena's father was once a very rich man in Finland. He had 3 or 4 wives and around 8 children. He loved fine things, but in the end, there wasn't much money left for the children. The train rushed through the dark night, its wheels humming against the tracks. The guard took another sip of vodka before continuing. Carl, the oldest son, was a bad man. People say he wanted an easy life, always looking for money. Mr. Harris listened closely, his mind still reeling from what he had seen. Elena had a difficult life. The guard went on. Her father, her brother, her husband, they were all hard men. One year, she visited her mother's family in Italy. That's where she met her husband, 𝘚𝘌𝘓𝘓. He was rich. But not kind. Mr. Harris sighed. He could already guess what happened next. They returned to Finland, the guard said, and Carl often visited their house. He wanted money from his sister's rich husband. Elena loved her brother and gave him some at first. But her husband hated Carl. He got angry with Elena and refused to give her any more money. And after that? Well, you know the rest of the story. Mr. Harris nodded slowly. Poor, unhappy Elena, he murmured. The rest of his trip in Oulu was quiet. He spent 2 weeks with his friends, enjoying his holiday. But when it was time to return to Helsinki, he made a different choice. He took the bus. It was slow, crowded, and uncomfortable, but Mr. Harris didn't mind. He would never take the night train across Finland again.